like this, every day's like this. My mama said I'm ahead of my time and never could love me more. But if she had to pay for my company, it'd be worth every dime. That's my mama, warm-hearted, but the world is freezing, dude. It's colder than ever when your girl is leaving you, like a dealer smoking all of his product, high and dry, like the steepest dune in the Sahara. In case of ride, you gotta let it ride off. If it sticks, brush it. If it stays, get your swat on. Even if she don't need him no more to lean upon, keep him even broader, head held high, even stronger shoulder. World, what you made of, go get it. Don't ever get ahead of yourself, just go slow with it. The last bit of advice, I feel is so fitting. Mama never told me this, but don't trust no bitches.
Sean, I wrote some stuff periodically, so pay attention to the video. It's really about a study that just came out that calls victimhood, or the victim mentality, or people that live in victimhood too long, a disorder. It's a pathology. I know that maybe doesn't make a lot of sense to you right now. Just listen carefully to what it's saying. I tried to edit it down so you can try to understand it a little bit better. And anyway, I love you, son. And I hope that you'll call me again. Been waiting and waiting and waiting. I'm going to start looking for you again here pretty soon. I know that you probably moved, and I'm trying not to put any pressure on you, but I told you before, I'm in it for the long haul. I'm living my life, but you know, it's not right what you've been told. That's all I can say. I kind of purposely put your mom like in this little evil light here, but I just did that for a point. Your mom likes to rewrite history and say and tries to predict my motives and says I'm evil and I'm abusive, and none of it was true. So I'm just showing you how the perception. See how I can just make her eyes look kind of. See, I put a little tint on it, but I did that on purpose, just to make a point. Your mom's not evil. She just is so unaware and doesn't have anybody around her telling her the right thing to do. So I was going to tell you a little bit how I met your mom, but I'll save that for the next video. This one, I want you to pay attention to it, what they're saying. These are people in the
they have a total
anyway, here it is.
lack of empathy
Talk to you
for
soon.
others. They deny that others suffer at all.
By definition, they're saying that.
And they feel morally justified in inflicting harm on people that they can cast as perpetrators in any way, whether it is the individuals in their life one-on-one, or whether it is groups of people in society in general.
And when the emperor really wants to paint you badly, they try to kill your support with your own people. How do you do that? You paint them as a criminal. So you're watching it right before your eyes.
You know, the 70s, you know, when we had much more of a sense then of a culture, is the default being, you try hard, you work at it, you get things done. If there's a problem, you know, you work at it. Now it's like, if there's a problem, you complain about it. And you're a victim. And the more a victim you are, the more power you're going to get. I mean, how crazy is that crap? Absolutely crazy. And so that's why Paul, Janice, and myself were all stunned to see the following article. Look at this. Self-victimhood is a personality type, researchers find. Look at her there. She's unhappy. But think about it. Self-victimhood is a personality type, researchers find. And let's talk about that. What do you guys think about that?
Well, when I said I hadn't seen any victims, I was lying. Like that kid in The Sixth Sense, I see victims everywhere.
Yes.
And we do. And unfortunately, what we live in is, I think, a victim culture.
Yes.
You know, the article talks about this sort of along the lines of a personality trait or perhaps a disorder. It does distinguish, it says in the article that this is separate from narcissism. I don't know if I'm buying that. You know, these things tend to have a lot of overlap uh, uh, in between narcissism, borderline, and these sort of personality traits. But what made me think about more than anything else when I saw the study was the work that I did in chemical dependency treatment centers with family members. And just to sort of set up the scenario, what we would see, of course, is usually a guy identified as the problem in the family with the alcohol or drug problem, because that is proportionally, that's the way it works out. It's mostly men. And so we have mostly female family members, wives, and other significant people to the family come in and participate in part of the treatment. And what I would see over and over and over again is wives martyring themselves for the group interaction. They would describe their lives somewhat as a martyr, and I sacrificed everything for him, and I called the boss when he was too drunk to go to work, and I protected the children from seeing him when he was passed out on the floor. And poor me, poor me, poor me. And there was a lot of reinforcement from other group members for that and from other clinicians. Because, yes, this is good. You need to get this out. You need to talk about this. But the moment that you challenge those individuals saying, well, did you leave? You say the kids were threatened by his drug abuse. Did you take them out of the scene? Did you protect them? Suddenly the tears would dry up. And here comes the anger. How dare you question me? I'm the victim here. And so the assertion was that anything other than the victim role for the codependent in the relationship wasn't acceptable.
Right.
They could not have agency. They could not be responsible for decisions. And look, I get it. I watched for 30 years in treatment centers, and I saw the tatters that living with alcoholic and drug addicts inflicts on the lives of families. It's devastating. It is absolutely devastating. But the victims, the so-called victims in that matter, unless their children participated. But the victims, the so-called victims in that matter, unless their children participated in that. And this is what I see. I like the term, there's no victims, only volunteers. And of course, this research points us in a direction that I think is helpful for men in understanding women in a different way, because look, none of this is new. I'm glad they finally put it in research, but none of this is new. This has been going on, I would argue, for a long, long time.
That's what I found too, reading the article and reading the study on which the article was based. It's very familiar, and I'm sure many people who are watching this are going to be able to identify the specific characteristics that the study picks out as part of this personality type. Oh yeah, right, I could see that, I could see that, I could see that, I would have predicted that. I mean, if you look up on even Wikipedia, something like victim mentality disorder, I think it already exists as an identifiable personality disorder. But what I found, I mean, and it's been known amongst the general populace, I think, for a long time, as you say, Paul, but what I found really interesting about the article and the study is that, like, it really very specifically codifies particular aspects of that personality type that I don't think are there in the general idea of victim mentality disorder, which just stresses the need that some people tend to have to see themselves as victims. But this actually outlines the major qualities of it, and I found that really interesting. Especially the lack of empathy for others, the moral elitism, the belief in oneself as superior and as morally pristine, the tendency to rationalize aggressive behavior, therefore, on one's own or one's group's part against the perceived enemy, the treasuring up, the what they call rumination. Like they give all these particular characteristics that are so helpful to have.
Yes. and important for us. And they also talk about a need for vengeance.
Yeah.
There's a need for vengeance, which, boy, you can see that in spades. This research
And what's
article.
the best way to get vengeance for many people who identify as victims? It's through an accusation.
Yep.
You get to reinforce the victim narrative and get vengeance at the same time simply by pointing a finger. You guys who have had this happen to you, this probably sounds quite familiar.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know that anyone will be particularly surprised, except that this research by these researchers actually made it into a major personality journal. And
Study pathologizes what we're seeing.
yeah,
It says victimhood is a pathology. If you think you're a victim too much, then there's something wrong with you. I mean, when I read that, I went, yes, it's so true. And these people who are addicted to this victim role are just incredibly insensitive to any alternatives. Like Paul's story about, they get angry if you're questioned. And that's part of what this study said. Let's look at, there's the study right there. And it was in the Personality and Individual Differences Journal in 2020 of May. So these guys get my vote for bravery.
Yeah.
And heads may yet roll.
Yeah, we'll see what kind of comments they get to this. It'll be actually quite interesting to see what they get. But these people were, they're brave as far as I'm concerned.
Well, they're putting a name to
Differences Journal in 2020 of May. So these guys get my vote for bravery.
Yeah.
And heads may yet roll.
Yeah, we'll see what kind of comments they get to this. It'll be actually quite interesting to see what they get. But these people were, they're brave as far as I'm concerned.
Well, they're putting a name to.
And these people who are addicted to this victim role are just incredibly insensitive to any alternatives. Like Paul's story about, they get angry if you're questioned. And that's part of what this study said. Let's look at, there's the study right there. And it was in the Personality and Individual Differences Journal in 2020 of May. So these guys get my vote for bravery.
Yeah.
And heads may yet roll.
Yeah, we'll see what kind of comments they get to this. It'll be actually quite interesting to see what they get. But these people were, they're brave as far as I'm concerned.
Well, they're putting a name to something that, in general, well, they're not only putting a name, but they're giving a very detailed outline to help people identify something that, in general terms, is just accepted as a reality.
Yes.
Yes, you are a victim, and we dare not question any aspect of your self-perception, your perception of the world, or your behavior as a result. And these guys are saying, no way, like, this is a major disorder, and it leads to egregious misbehavior and misperception, and it needs to be identified and hopefully treated. I mean, that's really, really useful to us.
And the implication is it's toxic for relationships.
Yeah, exactly.
They don't say that exactly, but I mean, it's obvious from reading it that they understand that this is not something that's going to help a relationship. This is something that's going to hurt it in a big way.
It really makes you wonder, though. I mean, how much would the average licensed marriage and family therapist embrace this information? Because what we see in their work so often is they literally collude with the wife.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Who is playing the victim, and they reinforce that. I mean, this is something that should cut into clinical work very deeply for a lot of therapists. But I'm thinking, what is the dissonance that's created when you've got this study that just lays this stuff out so perfectly, and then you've got a whole profession that makes their bread and butter off of perpetuating victimhood.
There is no funny. I can read out what they said if you want.
Okay, do please.
Okay. The first is the need for recognition refers to victims' motivation to have their victimhood acknowledged and empathized with.
Yeah,
So
I
if
thought that
you're a
was
victim,
fascinating.
you better have someone who's going to have empathy with you. It's
Mhm.
like Paul was talking about it. As soon as you say, well, why didn't you act in this way? You're not giving
Yeah.
me empathy. I'm only to get this side. I'm only to get empathy. So that was the first construct.
And I thought that was fascinating because it's that, and it's something that, I'm sure all of us have noticed about individuals, and even now we can say like
Yes.
social groups, whatever the subject, whatever is being addressed, whatever is going on, the victimhood always has to be affirmed. So if, a virus begins to spread around the entire world, what do we hear from feminist groups, for example? We hear that women are the worst affected, even when the early information was that men were dying in vastly disproportionate numbers, but we still had to hear about how women were worst affected. Then we heard for some long period of time about how visible minorities were worst affected, and that needed to be on the forefront of everybody's consciousness. We can never, it seems, in our world as it is now constituted, we can never forget the existence of these victim groups who always claim that their suffering deserves attention, that their suffering is all that really matters, and that everything else has to be forgotten about. It's the case where the victimhood becomes the primary identity of the person, and it dwarfs every other consideration. And I thought that really comes across well in this study.
Yes. And then number 2 is they talk about moral elitism. This is interesting. Moral elitism refers to the perception of immaculate morality of the self. In other words, my morality is immaculate, and the immorality of the other side.
Yeah.
Have we seen that before?
Wow.
I'll point this out, and it'll probably piss off a few people that attend like ACA and CODA and other related 12-step meetings. My observation of those meetings, for the most part, is they are a bunch of broken people coming together to hide behind their moral elitism.
Yeah.
That's what I see over and over in those circumstances, is people portraying themselves as martyrs and saints, and making a big show of finally learning how to take care of themselves, which, believe me, most of them been taking care of themselves pretty damn well in a lot of dysfunctional ways. But I see that in those programs over and over and over again, and it makes me sad to see it, because there is absolutely help to be had for these things, but not you can't get help if you've got to hang on to the identity of a victim. We saw it for years in the 80s. Tom, you remember the I'm a survivor t-shirts that's so common to the therapeutic. Those t-shirts should have said I'm a victim, because that's what they're really saying. They're not survivors, they're victims, and they're hanging on to that identity even through their apparel through life. It's absolutely insane.
Yeah, I always cringed when people would talk about I'm a survivor. Because, what? Survivor? How about you're a person?
Yeah, if you walk out of a bad car wreck, you're a survivor.
That's true. And then the next one. So that one says, my morality is immaculate, yours sucks. The next one says, a lack of empathy. Lack of empathy refers to an oblivious reaction to others in general and to their suffering in particular.
Yeah. And that is, it's the kiss of death to any individual or group trying to improve one's situation, addressing any real grievance or social injustice. As soon as you make moral indignation and hatred of others the ground of your personal identity or of your collective identity, it's a recipe for disaster. And it's one of the things that I really like about the men's rights movement in general,
Yes.
which is that a lot of us are very angry about specific situations that have been created for men in our society. And we do feel that there is serious injustice, but hating on women has not become part of the men's rights movement.
Right.
I have yet to meet a man who says, I hate women, they're all cruel. Most men that I talk to about their situation, even men that have suffered egregiously in a family courts or through a false accusation, just want it all to end. They don't hate women. They don't want to take revenge on women. They don't make mass generalizations about female evil. They talk about specific things that are wrong in our system, how they could be fixed, and how they want to make everything better for everybody so that families can be healthier, men and women can have a better relationship, the trust and the liking, the amity between men and women can be restored, that kind of thing. And you know, and that is, I think, so important, that you not allow hatred to dominate either your personal psychology or the psychology of your movement. And unfortunately,
in general, I think have avoided this in some ways, because if you look at what happens in divorce, I mean, so often what I see with men in divorces, they say, well, I'll give her a little bit more. I'll give her more than this, just to, maybe that'll help. Maybe that'll make things better. And that's their general mistake. And then later they go, damn, why did I do that? But they're trying to make things better. They're not trying to get vengeance. They're not saying, I'm going to get her. I'm going to get that bitch. You know, they're saying, oh, maybe if I give her this, things will get better.
Well, yeah, what men do, and it's a fatal mistake, is they say, maybe if I treat her with fairness and kindness in this, she will reciprocate that.
And treat me back in the same way.
If you're doing that with a chronic victim, they are not going to reciprocate.
Correct.
I think that's what
being victimized by a particular, you know, situation and seeing yourself as a victim, like assuming victimhood as your identity. And I've met a lot of men who were victimized. Wow. I mean, it was incredible what happened to them. But our movement is not about affirming people's sense of themselves as victims, you know, as their primary core identity. And that's the thing that this study really zeroes in on. And what
we're going to use this for a long time.
Yeah.
But if you see someone with this TIV, they're dangerous. These people are dangerous. And the research is telling you that. You know, so that's very different from what we've seen before.
Exactly.
God love them.
Well, in fact, in our culture now, I would say it's the opposite. Our culture tends to think the victims are actually better than other people. The victim believes that, I suffer, therefore I'm better. And our society affirms that. And in fact, we have this idea that victims have more empathy for others because they've suffered, and that we should put them in positions of power because...
it's how we get so much unabashed man-hating out of feminists, is because they feel justified in their hatred. And it's, of course, it's an absolute sickness. It's a mental defect that we're seeing at play, but they don't realize it, and neither does the mental health establishment.
Exactly.
In fact, they perpetuate it.
Should we go to the last one?
Yeah.
The last one, they talk about rumination. They say, finally, rumination refers to a focus of attention on the symptoms of one's distress and its possible causes and consequences rather than its possible solutions.
Exactly.
I'm triggered.
Yeah, really. The whole thing about triggered, I mean, it's like, you know, geez, look for solutions, not for places to hide.
Yeah. And I mean, this is to me, I mean, this whole thing is gendered, I think, which is not to say that there are not men who suffer from TIV, but I think we all know more women who have tendencies that way than we know men. And this final one, this notion of rumination, going over one's experience and sort of treasuring up the ways in which one has been wounded, the ways in which one has been badly done to, and not looking at solutions. And often this is a focus of disagreement between men and women, because a woman will say, listen to this, let me tell you about, you know, the terrible things that I've experienced that have been done to me. And the man will say, okay, well, you can fix it by doing this, or you could do this instead, or whatever. how dare you? I don't want it. No, I don't want to fix it. I just, I just want to experience
I want you to be transfixed by my victimhood.
Yeah.
That's exactly it.
Oh,
Yeah,
God.
I mean that it's so useful to see that actually named as part of this personality disorder. I have a friend who became involved in men's issues, and he's tried to approach feminists, especially on Facebook, saying he brings good news, and the good news is that things aren't nearly as bad as feminists make them out to be. And so he articulates that he's bringing the gospel of good news about feminism, that it's lying to women, but women are not happy to learn that.
Not.
They don't want to learn that the statistics are wrong or that things are much better for women than they've been told they are, because and that's the one thing that I thought was sort of missing in a way in this discussion, is the deep pleasure that comes from this particular disorder. I don't think that's mentioned once in the outline of the personality type. That it's not just, I mean, they emphasize that these people have low self-esteem. They talk about how they have, perhaps this originates in, I think what they called attachment disorders or faulty attachment in personal life, and that's a whole other issue is how this starts. But I think that part of the problem is that it feels really good to believe oneself a victim and therefore morally superior and therefore not responsible and therefore not or capable of taking revenge without feeling guilty for that. All of that gives a rush of euphoria.
Yep. Kicks in the endorphins.
And guys, one thing I want to say about this, I want to make sure this gets out before we stop talking. Look, crazy cannot hide. It can't. I talk to guys all the time, and I've been a guy who said after a really terrible relationship experience, I had no way of knowing. It was like it came out of the blue. What bullshit was I spouting? It doesn't come out of the blue. Craziness is apparent. If you've got values and standards and you understand stuff like TIV, then you know when somebody comes out with way too much information and it's all about victimhood very early in meeting them, they will come out with it. That's part of the rumination, is that TIV is TMI. And you see this and you do nothing, because while men are infatuated, while all of us are infatuated, we tend to overlook negatives in the other one.